The first thing that hit me wasn't the cold. It was the laughter. Sharp, drunk, careless. I was crouched in wet soil, hands numb, trying to save a row of vines from an unexpected frost, when something hard slammed into my shoulder and dropped into the mud beside me. A champagne cork. Still warm. Still expensive. I looked up, and that's when my sister ruined her own life. She stood on the terrace above me, wrapped in silk and diamonds, arm-linked with a man she'd known for 6 months, surrounded by people who smelled like money and entitlement. She raised her glass, pointed directly at me, and laughed. "Relax," she told them. "She's just the gardener. We keep her around to make the place look authentic." The crowd laughed. I didn't, because the woman she had just humiliated owned every inch of land beneath their feet, and she had no idea what was coming next. Before I tell you how this ends, you need to understand how I got there, why I was in the mud instead of on a flight, and why that single sentence lit a fuse I'd been holding for 15 years. My name is Margot Hale. I'm 36 years old, and I'm the sole proprietor of Blackthorn Ridge Estate, a private agricultural property outside Sonoma County that quietly moves millions in premium exports every year. Officially, I'm the operations director. Unofficially, I'm the reason the estate exists at all. Behind my back, people call me cold, efficient, unapproachable. They're not wrong. I don't smile to make others comfortable. I don't explain myself to people who haven't earned it. And I don't forgive disrespect, especially not from family. Hold on, before we get into the real stuff, I want to know, what are you doing right now while hearing my voice? Cooking? Driving? Lying in bed pretending you're productive? Drop it in the comments. I read them. Always. Now back to the day everything cracked open. That engagement party wasn't supposed to happen yet. The budget alone was obscene. Nearly $92,000 spent on imported flowers, live musicians flown in from Milan, and champagne I would never personally drink. It was all arranged under the assumption that I was in Europe finalizing a distribution deal. That assumption was wrong. I came home early because I smelled a problem, and I'm never wrong about those. You see, my sister Corinne has always believed life was something you took, not built. Growing up, she learned early that charm could replace effort and beauty could excuse cruelty. While I was learning soil chemistry and balance sheets, she was learning how to be admired. We were raised in the same house, but only one of us was ever prepared to keep it standing. The estate? It was never meant for her. That truth was written in legal ink years ago, locked away in a safe Corinne never bothered to open. She assumed the world would simply hand itself to her eventually. And on that terrace, sipping champagne, she truly believed she'd won. What she didn't know was this. Every vendor at that party answered to me. Every contract, every permit, every bottle poured existed at my discretion. And the man standing beside her, the one she called her future, I knew something about him that would detonate the evening like a match to gasoline. As Corinne lifted her glass for another toast, I brushed the mud from my hands, stood up slowly, and made a single phone call. That was the moment the party stopped being hers and started becoming mine. I didn't walk toward the house right away. That was the first mistake people always make in moments like this. They rush. They react. They reveal emotion. I did none of that. Instead, I stayed where I was, boots sinking slightly into the wet ground, watching from a distance as the party continued above me. Waiters in pressed black vests glided across stone tiles. Laughter floated down in careless waves. Someone clinked a glass, calling for attention. Corinne's attention. She leaned into her fiancé, Julian Mercer, flashing that practiced smile, the one that suggested warmth but never quite reached her eyes. Julian kissed her cheek. Cameras flashed. Applause followed. Microhook truth? That kiss almost didn't happen. Because 2 minutes earlier, the call I placed had reached the one person Julian never wanted hearing my name. I slipped my phone back into my jacket pocket and finally started walking. Not toward the terrace. Toward the service entrance. I knew every path on that estate. Every shortcut, every blind spot, every camera angle. I helped design the security layout after a theft incident years ago. One Corinne still thought was bad luck. As I passed the catering prep area, the head coordinator froze mid-sentence. "Miss Hale," she whispered. You're back?" I nodded once. No smile. "Status?" I asked. She swallowed. "Full engagement program. Tier 3 luxury. All deposits cleared this morning." "Good," I said. "Lock down the secondary bar. No alcohol leaves the terrace without my approval." Her eyes widened. "Is something wrong?" I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "Not yet. That's how real power works. You don't announce it. You let people feel it creeping in." I moved on. Behind the scenes, the estate was a machine, one I'd spent over a decade fine-tuning. Every staff member knew the rules. Efficiency, discretion, loyalty. Corinne thought they worked for the family name. They worked for me. I reached the side stairwell just as Corinne began her speech. Her voice echoed through the courtyard speakers, syrupy and self-congratulatory. "I just want to thank Julian's parents," she said, gesturing to a sharply dressed couple near the front, "for welcoming me into a world I never imagined I'd be part of." Never imagined. That line almost made me laugh. The Mercer parents smiled politely, but I noticed something Corinne didn't. Mr. Mercer's jaw was tight. His wife's fingers tapped the stem of her glass. They were nervous. Good. Because the Mercers weren't billionaires. They were leveraged to the teeth. Julian had told Corinne a story. A very convincing one. Generational wealth. Private equity. Family offices. She'd swallowed it whole because it fit the life she wanted. What he didn't know was that my European deal, the one I'd cut short, was actually a due diligence audit on a shell corporation tied directly to his name. And it was dirty. I paused at the bottom of the stairwell, listening as Corinne continued. "And of course," she laughed lightly. "Thank you to the staff who keep this place running, especially our gardener. She's very dedicated." More laughter. I looked up then. Slowly, deliberately, our eyes met. For half a second, something flickered across her face. Confusion, recognition, then dismissal. She turned away. That was her second mistake. I stepped onto the terrace just as Julian raised his glass for a toast. The music softened. Conversations quieted. All eyes shifted to him. "Tonight," he said confidently, "is about legacy. About building something lasting." I stopped directly behind the Mercer parents, close enough to hear Mrs. Mercer whisper, "Did you invite her?" Julian froze. He turned and saw me. Mud-stained boots, dark jacket, hair pulled back. "Come." Not a gardener. Not anymore. I smiled, not kindly but precisely. "Julian," I said evenly, "we need to talk." The silence that followed was surgical. Corinne laughed too loudly. "Oh my God. You can't just wander up here. This is a private event." I tilted my head. "Is it?" She opened her mouth to respond. That's when the head of catering appeared beside me, clipboard in hand. "Miss Hale," she said clearly, "do you want us to proceed?" Every single person on that terrace heard it. Corinne's smile cracked. "Proceed with what?" she demanded. I met my sister's eyes. "With the truth," I said. And somewhere behind us, the music stopped completely. You could feel it, the shift. Not loud, not dramatic, just a subtle tightening in the air, like the moment before a storm finally decides to break. Corinne blinked at me, once, twice, as if trying to recalibrate reality. "Margot," she said, forcing a laugh, "this really isn't the time. Go talk to staff services if you're confused." Confused. That word landed heavier than the cork had earlier. Julian stepped forward, smoothing his jacket. "Listen," he said quietly, trying to keep his voice steady. "We'll handle this later." Later was never coming. I turned to the head of catering again. "Hold service," I said, "and ask security to seal the gates." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Corinne's head snapped toward me. "You can't do that." I didn't look at her. I just did. Microhook moment? That's when her confidence collapsed. Because security moved. 2 guards, men who'd worked the estate longer than Corinne had known Julian, shifted positions at the terrace entrance. Radios crackled. The iron gates at the far end of the property closed with a dull, unmistakable clang. Mrs. Mercer's face drained of color. "Julian," she whispered, "what is this?" He didn't answer her. He was staring at me like he'd just realized the floor beneath him was glass. Corinne marched toward me, heels clicking sharply against stone. "You are embarrassing yourself," she hissed. "You work here. That's it. Stop pretending." I finally turned fully to face her. "You're right," I said calmly. "I do work here." Then I reached into my jacket and pulled out a slim leather folder. "And this is where I keep the paperwork that proves it." I handed the folder to Julian's father. Not to Corinne. Not to Julian. To the man who understood contracts. "Blackthorn Ridge Estate," I said clearly, projecting my voice just enough. "Deed of sole ownership. Transferred legally 12 years ago." Mr. Mercer flipped it open. His eyes widened. He looked up at me, then at Julian. "What is this?" he demanded. Julian swallowed. "Dad." "It's the property you're standing on," I interrupted. "And the woman you just watched insult me? She has no legal claim to it." Corinne laughed again, but this time it was thin, brittle. "That's not true. This is family land." "Yes," I agreed. "My family." I turned to the crowd now. I wanted witnesses. My parents built the early foundation of this estate. When they passed, the board assumed Corinne would inherit because she was visible. I paused. But visibility doesn't run a business. A murmur spread. While Corinne traveled and networked, I studied. I rebuilt the export model. I paid off the debts no one else knew existed. I met Corinne's eyes, and I bought out every remaining interest quietly. Her face had gone pale. Julian's mother pressed a hand to her mouth. "You told us this was hers." Julian finally found his voice. "It's a misunderstanding." "No," I said sharply. "It's a lie." That word cracked something open. I stepped closer to Julian, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "Do you want me to continue?" I asked softly. "Or do you want to explain the Luxembourg account yourself?" His breath hitched. The Mercers stiffened. Corinne looked between us, panic finally seeping through her anger. "What is she talking about?" I straightened. "Julian proposed to you using money that doesn't belong to him," I said evenly. "Funds tied to a company under investigation for tax evasion and wire fraud." The crowd erupted. Shocked whispers. Phones subtly raised. A few guests edged backward, as if distance might protect them. "That's a lie." Julian snapped. I nodded once toward the terrace screen. "Play it," I said. The estate's audiovisual manager hesitated for exactly half a second before obeying. The screen flickered. Documents appeared. Transaction logs. Corporate filings. Julian's name highlighted again and again. Corinne stared at the screen, then at Julian. "You said your family was clean," she whispered. Julian didn't answer, because at that exact moment his phone started ringing. And I knew who was calling. The look on his face told me everything. This wasn't just an engagement party anymore. It was a countdown. Julian's phone kept ringing. Once. Twice. A third time. Each vibration looked like it physically hurt him. He didn't answer. That, more than anything, told his parents the truth. Mrs. Mercer reached for her husband's arm, whispering urgently, "This isn't what you said. You told us everything was verified." Julian's jaw tightened. This isn't the full picture." I stepped closer, just enough to reclaim control of the moment. "You're right," I said. "It's not the full picture." I gestured to the screen again. "We've only covered the money." Corinne finally exploded. "Stop it," she screamed, her voice cracking through the terrace. "You're doing this on purpose. You're jealous. You always have been." The accusation was familiar, comfortable. It had worked on people our entire childhood. It didn't work on me. "I'm not jealous," I said quietly. "I'm thorough." That shut her up. I turned back to the Mercers. "The investigation Julian's avoiding? It escalated yesterday morning. Assets frozen. Travel flags placed." Mr. Mercer's face hardened. "Julian, tell me she's lying." Julian opened his mouth. Nothing came out. That was the moment his father stopped seeing him as a son and started seeing him as a liability. The crowd sensed it too. Conversation stopped. Guests leaned in, caught between discomfort and fascination. This was no longer polite drama. This was exposure. I glanced toward the estate manager standing near the bar. He gave me a subtle nod. Good. Phase 2 was ready. Margot, Corinne said suddenly, her tone shifting, syrupy now. We're sisters. Whatever this is, we can talk about it privately. There it was. The retreat. I smiled. Not because I was amused, but because the script was unfolding exactly as planned. You had your chance to talk privately, I said. You chose public. I faced the guests again. Since we're all here, let's finish the story. I snapped my fingers once. Security escorted a man onto the terrace. Middle-aged. Expensive suit. Nervous eyes. Julian went pale. That, I said, is Victor Lang, compliance officer, formerly employed by Mercer Holdings. Victor cleared his throat. I was subpoenaed this morning. Gasps again. Mrs. Mercer shook her head. Julian, what have you done? Victor continued, voice trembling. The engagement ring purchase was processed through an intermediary account tied to the same shell corporation currently under review. Corinne looked down at her ring, slowly, as if it had just turned into something poisonous. You told me it was from Paris, she whispered. Julian snapped. It was, originally. Enough, Mr. Mercer barked. He turned to me. Why are you doing this here? That was a fair question. Because lies thrive in comfort, I answered. And tonight was built on them. I let that sink in. Then I delivered the line I'd been holding. This engagement party, I said, was never approved. Confusion rippled. The permits were provisional, I continued. Conditional on verification of the hosting party's authority. Corinne laughed weakly. Authority? What does that even mean? It means, I said calmly, this event is unauthorized use of private property. Her eyes widened. I nodded toward the estate manager again. Effective immediately, I said, this gathering is terminated. The music system shut off completely. Lights dimmed slightly. Staff froze, then moved with precision. Guests will be escorted out, the manager announced professionally. Please remain calm. Panic spread. Corinne grabbed my arm. Hard. You can't do this to me. I looked down at her hand, then back at her face. I can, I said. And I am. She whispered. You're ruining my life. I leaned in close enough that only she could hear. No, I said softly. I'm returning it to you. Julian tried one last move. Margot, we can fix this. I can explain everything. I met his eyes. You already did, I replied. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Not close yet, but close enough. Corinne followed the sound, dread blooming across her face. What's that? She asked. I checked my watch. External investigators, I said. They tend to arrive right after the party ends. Her knees buckled. And that's when I realized this wasn't even the worst part for her. Not yet. Corinne didn't collapse gracefully. She sank, like someone realizing too late the ground beneath them was never solid. Julian caught her elbow instinctively, then hesitated, as if touching her now might somehow incriminate him. That hesitation said more than any confession. The sirens grew louder. Not rushing. Measured. Official. Guests were already being guided toward the exits, their expensive shoes scraping awkwardly against stone as whispered speculation spread faster than the cold air. Phones were no longer subtle. This wasn't just a scandal. It was content. I hated that part, but I didn't stop it. Corinne found her voice again, thin and shaking. Margot, please. Please. That word used to undo me. Years ago, when she wanted my silence. When she wanted my work credited to her. When she wanted my absence to make her shine brighter. Not tonight. You can't let them take him, she whispered. This will destroy everything. I looked past her at Julian. He wasn't looking at her. He was watching the gates. Calculating. That told me exactly how temporary his devotion had been. This, I said slowly, is what happens when you build your life on borrowed money and borrowed stories. She shook her head violently. You set me up. I leaned down so we were eye level. No, I said. I stepped out of your way. The investigators arrived just as security cleared the last of the guests. 2 vehicles. No flashing lights. No spectacle. Professional. Efficient. Mr. Mercer stepped forward, shoulders squared. We were misled. We had no knowledge of any illegal activity. The lead investigator nodded. We'll take that into account. Julian finally spoke, his voice hoarse. Margot, if you had a problem, you could have come to me. I laughed softly. That's the thing about people like you, I said. You think access equals accountability. I handed the investigator a slim drive. Everything you need is there. Timelines, correspondence, financial trails. He accepted it without comment. Corinne stared at the drive like it was a weapon. You planned this, she whispered. Yes, I said simply. Because planning is not cruelty. It's clarity. Julian was escorted aside. Not handcuffed. Not yet. But he wasn't free either. Corinne lunged toward him, panic surging. Don't leave me. He hesitated. Again. Then followed the investigator. That was the moment her world truly shattered. She turned on me, fury replacing fear. You've always hated me. I straightened. I loved you. I corrected. You just didn't notice. That silence hurt more than shouting ever could. She laughed suddenly. Loud. Unstable. So what now? You throw me out? You win. I considered her. The estate behind us glowed softly under the lights. Vine rows stretching into darkness. Everything I'd protected. Everything she'd tried to wear like a costume. This isn't about winning, I said. It's about ending. She looked confused. I motioned toward the house. You can stay tonight. Pack your things. Tomorrow you leave. Her mouth fell open. You can't do that. I can, I said. You signed the exit agreement 3 years ago. Remember? You said you trusted me. Her face drained of color. I never read it, she whispered. I know, I said. That was the 3rd mistake. The investigator returned. Mr. Mercer will be cooperating. I nodded. Thank you. As they left, Corinne sank onto the stone bench, staring at nothing. For the first time in her life, there was no audience. No applause. No illusion. Just consequences. I turned to leave. She called after me, voice breaking. Was any of it real? Did you ever care? I paused. Not for her. For myself. Yes, I said quietly. That's why this hurts. Inside the house, staff moved silently, already restoring order. Cleaning. Resetting. Life goes on. But as I reached the doorway, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You think this is over? I stopped. Because I knew that tone. And I knew exactly whose game I had just stepped into next. The message sat on my screen like a challenge. You think this is over? I didn't reply. I never reply to threats on the first move. Silence forces the other side to reveal themselves. Inside the house, the echo of the party was already disappearing. Glasses cleared. Flowers removed. Evidence erased, not of wrongdoing, but of excess. The estate had survived worse. Corinne hadn't. I found her later in the West Wing, sitting on the edge of the guest bed, shoes kicked off, makeup streaked like she'd finally cried after years of rehearsal. She looked small in that room. Temporary. Who texted you? She asked without looking up. I stopped at the door. You don't get to ask questions tonight. She laughed bitterly. You always wanted this. Me powerless. You in control. No, I said. I wanted you honest. She looked up then. If you walk away now, Julian's people will come after you. You humiliated them. I didn't. I corrected. I documented them. That distinction matters. I left her there and went to my office, the real one, tucked behind the tasting hall. Concrete walls. No windows. Servers humming softly. This was where the estate truly lived. I pulled up the security logs. And there it was. A vehicle had entered the outer perimeter 20 minutes before the party ended. Cleared through a temporary access code. One I hadn't issued. Microhook moment? Someone had been inside my system. I traced the code. Vendor credentials. Recently updated. Approved by my assistant. I closed my eyes. Not betrayal. Manipulation. My phone buzzed again. Last chance to make this quiet. I typed back one word. No. The response was immediate. Then you should check your contracts. Especially the one with Helix Distribution. My stomach tightened. Helix was the European deal I'd rushed home from. The one that would triple our exports. The one Julian had tried to leverage as legitimacy. I pulled the file, scrolled, and froze. A clause had been amended. A silent amendment. Buried deep. Legal. Devastating. If invoked, Helix could claim operational control in the event of reputational instability, which tonight absolutely qualified. Someone had planned this far ahead. Someone with access. Someone who knew I'd exposed Julian publicly. I leaned back, breathing slowly. Okay, so this wasn't just revenge. This was a counterstrike. I called my attorney. Don't speak, I said when she answered. Just listen. 5 minutes later, she swore under her breath. That clause shouldn't be enforceable, she said. But they'll try. Who benefits? I asked. There was a pause. Someone who wants leverage without owning the land. I ended the call and stood. The realization hit like ice. Julian hadn't been the architect. He'd been bait. The real player wanted me destabilized, distracted, publicly exposed so they could move in cleanly. And I knew exactly who hated the way I ran Blackthorn Ridge. I walked back toward the west wing. Corinne was still there. I closed the door behind me. Did Julian ever mention Helix? I asked. She stiffened. Why? Answer. She swallowed. He said his family had interests. I nodded. And did he ever introduce you to anyone from their board? She hesitated, then whispered. There was a woman. Older. Very polished. She said she admired you. Said you were predictable. Predictable. I smiled. That woman had tried to buy my estate years ago. Quietly. Aggressively. I'd refused. She'd smiled then too. I stood. Pack faster. Corinne looked up. What? You're leaving now, I said. Tonight. Her eyes widened. You said tomorrow. Plans change, I replied. Especially when enemies think you're alone. As I escorted her toward the service exit, headlights flared outside the gate. A familiar car. The woman from Helix. Stepping onto my property. Uninvited. Confident. I handed Corinne her coat. This is where you stop being my problem, I said. And start being hers. She stared at me, terrified. What are you going to do? I watched the woman approach. I'm going to remind her, I said calmly, why people don't take what's mine. She didn't knock. People like her never do. The woman from Helix walked through the gates as if they were ceremonial, not defensive. Tailored coat. Perfect posture. The kind of confidence that comes from believing consequences are for other people. Her name was Vivian Cross. And 5 years ago, she'd offered me 8 figures for Blackthorn Ridge. I'd said no without blinking. Margot Hale, she said smoothly, stopping a few feet away. Still allergic to surprises, I see. I gestured toward the quiet estate. You're trespassing. She smiled. Am I? According to the amended clause you're about to fight in court, operational oversight is flexible. Microhook truth? She thought she'd already won. I didn't invite her inside. I didn't need to. Julian was sloppy, she continued, but useful. Emotional people always are. So were you, I said, when you tried to buy this place. Her smile tightened. I don't like being told no, she admitted, especially by someone who thinks land is legacy instead of leverage. That's because you don't understand either, I replied. She glanced past me toward the house. Your sister does, though. She was very cooperative. My jaw clenched. What did you promise her? Vivian tilted her head. A way out. Of course. Corinne had always mistaken escape for freedom. I stepped closer. If you think you can destabilize me into surrendering control, you've misread the entire situation. Vivian laughed softly. You exposed my asset publicly. I'm simply responding. I raised an eyebrow. Asset. She didn't answer. Instead, she handed me a tablet. On it emails. My emails. Taken out of context. Edited. Reframed to suggest financial manipulation. Labor violations. Ethical breaches. Fabricated, but plausible. You release those, I said calmly, and you trigger an investigation you won't survive. She leaned in. Only if they can prove intent. I handed the tablet back. Then let's test intent, I said. I pulled out my phone and pressed play. A recording filled the air. Vivian's voice. Clear. Sharp. Once the engagement implodes, Hale will act emotionally. We move Helix in under reputational protection and squeeze her out without litigation. Silence. Her face didn't change, but her eyes did. You were recording me, she said. I record everyone who makes offers I don't like, I replied. She exhaled slowly. You've become paranoid. No, I said. I've become prepared. I gestured toward the gate. Leave. She didn't move. You think this ends with Julian? She asked. There are people watching. Investors who don't like instability. I smiled. Then it's a good thing. I said, that instability isn't what happened tonight. I tapped my phone. Across the estate, screens flickered on. News alerts. Headlines. Financial fraud investigation opens into Mercer Holdings. Helix Distribution named as person of interest. Vivian's breath caught. You leaked it, she said. I shared documented facts. I corrected. She stared at the screen. For the first time, her confidence fractured. This isn't over, she said. No, I agreed. It's just no longer private. She turned sharply and walked back toward her car. As the gates closed behind her, my phone buzzed again. A new message. From Corinne. I didn't know she'd do this. I swear. I didn't reply. Some truths arrived too late to matter. I stood alone on the terrace, the same place Corinne had laughed earlier that night. The estate was quiet now, but I knew something she didn't. This wasn't the climax. It was the calm before the final reckoning. Because when people like Vivian lose leverage, they don't retreat. They burn everything. And I was about to let her try. The fire didn't come that night. It came quietly, legally, strategically. 3 days later, I was in my office reviewing export schedules when my attorney walked in without knocking. That alone told me something had shifted. They've filed, she said. Helix is invoking the reputational instability clause. I didn't look up. Of course they are. They're also pushing for an emergency injunction, temporary operational control pending review. That got my attention. I set the papers down slowly. How temporary? She exhaled. 90 days. Maybe more if they stall. 90 days was an eternity in harvest season. Microhook moment? That was Vivian's real play. Not to own the land. To choke it. I stood. What's our window? 24 hours, my attorney said. Before a judge decides who's allowed to make decisions here. I nodded once. Then we move now. By noon, the estate was in controlled chaos. Accountants, compliance officers, independent auditors I'd kept on quiet retainer for years. People who knew my reputation and valued their own. Vivian had underestimated one thing. I never ran Blackthorn Ridge alone. By sunset, we had compiled a counterfile thick enough to break a desk. Not just defensive, offensive. Proof of Helix's pattern. Similar clauses. Similar instabilities. Similar takeovers. Predatory. Repetitive. I sent it to the court and to the press. Because sunlight changes everything. That night, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. You're enjoying this, Vivian said, her voice tight now. Turning business into theater. You made it theater, I replied. I just sold tickets. She laughed bitterly. You think you've won because you embarrass me. No, I said. I think I've won because you're calling. Silence. Then quieter. What do you want? That was the sound of leverage dying. I want Helix off my land, I said. Permanently. You'll bankrupt us, she snapped. I smiled. No. I'll expose you. Bankruptcy is optional. She hung up. 2 hours later, the injunction request was withdrawn. Publicly, Helix cited procedural reconsideration. Privately, Vivian sent one final message. You've made an enemy. I archived it. Because enemies only matter when they can still reach you. Corinne left the country that week. No goodbye. No apology worth mentioning. Just a transfer request for funds she wasn't entitled to. Denied. For the first time, she had to live without my shadow catching her fall. And something unexpected happened. The story went viral. Not the insult. Not the party. The ownership. People loved that part. Woman exposes fraud at own estate after being called the gardener. Messages flooded in. From women. From founders. From people who'd been underestimated and stayed quiet long enough to win properly. That's when I understood something important. This wasn't just revenge. It was a reminder. On the terrace a week later, I stood where Corinne once laughed. The vines were safe. The frost had passed. Everything she tried to take was still growing. And everything I built was finally visible. But one loose end remained. Julian. He'd been released pending investigation. And that morning, my assistant told me he'd requested a meeting. Private. At a cafe in town. I considered it for exactly 3 seconds. Then I said yes. Because closure isn't mercy. It's confirmation. As I picked up my coat, I wondered what he thought he could still bargain with. And whether he understood. The gardener was done kneeling. Julian chose the cafe. That told me everything. Public space. Neutral ground. Witnesses nearby. He wanted safety. He wanted control. He got neither. I arrived 5 minutes late on purpose. He stood when he saw me, then thought better of it and sat back down. His suit was still expensive, but it no longer fit the man inside it. Stress had a way of shrinking people. You look well, he said, forcing a smile. I replied, sitting across from him. Say what you came to say. He flinched. Microhook moment? He'd expected anger. He got indifference. I didn't know Vivian would go that far, he said quickly. I was a middleman. That's it. I stirred my coffee. Middlemen don't propose with laundered money. His jaw tightened. I loved your sister. I looked at him then. Really looked. No, I said. You loved the access. He sighed. She was desperate to escape your shadow. That wasn't my doing, I replied. That was her refusal to build her own. He leaned forward. You have to understand, I'm finished. The investigation. My parents. My reputation. I met his eyes. You should have thought about that before you lied. He swallowed. I can help you. I didn't respond. I know where Vivian hides things, he continued. Accounts. Shell boards. Offshore trustees. I raised an eyebrow. And why would you give me that? Because, he said quietly, I have nothing left. There it was. The truth beneath the performance. What do you want? I asked. He hesitated. Immunity. Or at least a reference. Somewhere. Anywhere. I laughed softly. You still think this ends with favors, I said. He recoiled slightly. I'm not your lifeline, I continued. I'm your consequence. He stared down at his hands. You used my sister, I said calmly. You humiliated me, and you underestimated both. He nodded once. I did. The server approached. I declined a refill. Here's what will happen, I said. You'll cooperate fully. Not with me, with the investigators. You'll tell them everything, voluntarily. And if I don't, I smiled. Then Vivian will. That did it. He exhaled sharply. She'll destroy me. She already has, I replied. You just haven't accepted it yet. He sat back, defeated. Why meet me at all? He asked. I stood. Because I wanted you to see me like this, I said, unbothered. I turned to leave. Margot, he called. I stopped but didn't turn around. She never loved me, he said. Did she? I considered the question, then answered honestly. No, I said. She loved what you represented. I left him there. That afternoon, I received confirmation. Julian had agreed to cooperate. Fully. Vivian's house of cards began to fold faster than I expected. Subpoenas, asset freezes, board resignations. She sent no more messages. And then silence. A week later, I stood in front of the estate board. Not to defend myself. To expand. We approved a new initiative. Women-led vineyards. Ethical exports. Transparency as a brand, not a risk. Blackthorn Ridge didn't just survive. It evolved. But there was one final thing I needed to do. I returned to the terrace. The same spot. Same stone. Different woman. I picked up a single champagne cork still lodged between the tiles. Kept it. Not as a reminder of humiliation, but as proof. That moment changed everything. And if you're still listening to my voice right now, you already know why. Because the people who laugh at you when you're kneeling, they never imagine what happens when you stand. There's a strange quiet that comes after everything burns down. Not peaceful, not empty, just honest. Weeks after the engagement disaster, after the investigations, after the headlines moved on to fresher scandals, Blackthorn Ridge felt different. Not lighter, stronger. Like a structure that had survived an earthquake and discovered its foundation was deeper than anyone thought. I walked the estate alone that morning. No staff, no meetings, no cameras. Just rows of vines catching early sunlight, leaves whispering in the breeze like they knew something the world didn't. Revenge stories usually end with applause. Mine ended with silence. And that's how I knew it was real. Corinne sent one final email from overseas. No subject line. No greeting. I hope you're happy. I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. Happiness was never the goal. Clarity was. Julian pled guilty 2 months later. Cooperated fully. Vivian vanished from public leadership shortly after. Quiet resignations, strategic withdrawals, the kind of disappearance reserved for people who lost without ever admitting it. Helix distribution dissolved within the year. Blackthorn Ridge didn't just remain independent. It became untouchable. We published everything. Our finances, our labor practices, our contracts. Radical transparency. The very thing Vivian tried to weaponize became the reason investors lined up instead of circling. That's the part no one warns predators about. When you expose someone who has nothing to hide, you don't weaken them. You armor them. I was invited to speak at conferences I used to watch online at 2 a.m. Women stopped me to say, I didn't know I could wait that long and still win. You can. Waiting isn't weakness when you're building leverage. On the anniversary of that night, I hosted a small gathering. No champagne towers. No speeches. Just people who worked the land with me. People who stayed loyal when loyalty wasn't fashionable. At sunset, someone asked me if I ever regretted how public it all became. I thought about Corinne's laugh, the cork hitting my shoulder, the word gardener spoken like a dismissal. And I shook my head. No, I said, because silence would have taught the wrong lesson. Here's the truth they don't tell you enough. Revenge doesn't have to be loud. It doesn't have to be cruel. And it definitely doesn't have to look like anger. The most devastating revenge is competence revealed too late. People will underestimate you as long as it benefits them. Let them. Build anyway. Because one day, they'll clap for you. Or they'll choke on their own applause. Either way, you'll already be standing. If this story hit something in you, if you've ever been dismissed, minimized, laughed at while you were doing the real work, then you already understand why I shared this. Before you go, do me a favor. Like this video if you believe quiet power is the most dangerous kind. Share it with someone who's being underestimated right now. And subscribe to the channel Silent Revenge Lab because this is where we tell the stories they never see coming. And remember, they only laugh when they think they're safe. They stop laughing when you stand.